The body of a 21-year-old man was found in the center of the living room. The carpet was soaked in blood. The grandmother's underwear was found stained with semen. The furniture was overturned, and the walls were smeared with brown marks. Neighbors claimed the house had always been inhabited only by the grandmother, who has Down syndrome, her grandson, and their dog. But now the woman was gone. The door was locked from the inside, and the only witness, the dog, was racing through the rooms, howling in the silence. The house was located in a residential area of a small American town. The neighborhood was tranquil, manicured lawns, the familiar rhythm of neighborhood life, and occasional incidents. It was inhabited by retired families, middle-class workers, and students who could afford to rent housing close to schools. Against this backdrop, the one-story house with its gray facade and low fence stood out in no way. 3 people lived there: an elderly woman, her adult grandson, and a medium-sized dog. Neighbors knew little about the family. People noted that the young man was considered sociable only within his inner circle, but on the street he preferred to avoid contact. His grandmother, by contrast, was almost always at home and rarely went out even to the store. The grandson handled the usual household chores, grocery shopping, walking the dog, and minor housework. Neighbors described them as a reserved but quiet family. There were no conflicts with others. Occasionally, loud music or a barking dog could be heard coming from the house, but this wasn't perceived as a problem. The only thing that caught the attention of attentive observers was the lack of guests. During their entire time together, no one saw friends or relatives visiting the house. The young man was 21, he had no permanent job, and worked occasionally in the computer services industry, helping neighbors fix their equipment and earning extra money online. His education was incomplete, and he dropped out after just a few semesters. According to neighbors, he spent most of his time at home on the computer, only occasionally going out. The grandmother was an elderly woman with disabilities. She needed constant support, and her grandson took on this role. He accompanied her to her rare medical appointments, took care of the household chores, and maintained the order of the house. Neighbors knew her as a gentle woman, but completely dependent on the help of others. Although their life appeared peaceful on the surface, some small details were alarming. Several people from the neighboring building reported hearing loud conversations at night, sometimes escalating into screams. However, the police never recorded any calls to this address. The dog held a special place in the family. It was a medium-sized dog, often seen on the street with the young man. Neighbors noted that it was well-groomed, but had recently appeared anxious. Several times it would break free from its owner's grasp and bark at passers-by for no apparent reason. These episodes were thought to be random, but later the dog's behavior played a key role in uncovering the tragedy. Those closest to the family claimed that the grandmother and grandson had an unusual attachment. They spent all their time together, rarely leaving the house. The grandson had virtually no social life of his own. This was attributed to the need to care for the elderly woman, but some acquaintances considered this attachment excessive. The interior of the house was in keeping with the family's standard of living. The furniture was basic, the appliances were not the latest model, and the decor was modest. The living room had a computer desk, a sofa, a television, and an old bookshelf nearby. The house looked well kept, but without excesses. The first alarming signs that the family's normal life had been disrupted appeared long before the tragedy. Neighbors began to notice that the yard wasn't being cleaned and that windows remained closed even during the day. Several times the dog was left unattended in the yard longer than usual. The grandson stopped going outside as regularly as before. These signs didn't arouse serious suspicion until the situation led to a tragic outcome. Thus, tension gradually built around the house. From the outside, it appeared ordinary, but inside, events were taking place that no one suspected. An investigation would later reveal that signs of trouble were noticeable, but went unnoticed. It was this oversight that played a role in the tragedy, taking those around it by surprise. The last time the grandmother and grandson were seen together was 2 days before the tragedy. A neighbor from the house across the street spotted them in the yard. The grandson was mending a fence, and the grandmother was sitting on a bench with her dog. The day seemed to be proceeding as usual. That evening, according to another neighbor, the lights were on in the house, and voices and barking could be heard. Nothing unusual happened then. The next day, everything changed. In the morning, the dog was spotted alone in the yard. It seemed confused and nervous. It would run along the fence and howl. Usually, it would be quickly brought back, but now it would remain outside for hours. No one saw the grandmother again. The grandson didn't leave the house, and even on his usual short walks with the dog, he was nowhere to be seen. That evening, several neighbors heard strange sounds coming from the house. One man claimed to have heard dull thuds and muffled screams. Another said he thought he heard something fall, followed by silence. These observations were ignored. The neighborhood was accustomed to not interfering in the affairs of its neighbors. But the uneasy feeling gradually grew. On the second day of the disappearance, a woman living across the street noticed the windows were tightly curtained. This seemed odd for a house where the curtains were usually left open. No one had come to the gate, taken out the trash, or gone out for groceries. The dog was alone in the yard again, its barking growing louder and shriller. Some residents began discussing the situation among themselves. Some suggested that the grandmother might have been hospitalized, leaving her grandson to take care of the house. Others suggested the family might have left unexpectedly, but no one saw anyone carrying bags out of the house or getting into a car. At the same time, one of his grandson's acquaintances tried to reach him on the phone. His calls went unanswered. He later told police that during his last conversation, the young man sounded tense, avoided details, and ended the conversation too abruptly. On the third day, the anxiety intensified. The dog in the yard looked exhausted, its barking frantic. A pungent odor emanated from the house, which neighbors described as unpleasant and unusual. It was this odor that proved decisive. One of the women called the police and asked them to check the house. The arriving police noted that the door was locked from the inside, ruling out the possibility that all the residents had simply left. The officers knocked and waited, but no one answered. They then walked around the house and noticed that the back door was slightly open, but blocked from the inside by furniture. This further heightened their suspicions. An oppressive silence reigned inside. The lights were out, the windows were closed. The first thing I noticed was the chaos in the hallway. An overturned chair, scattered things. Evidence indicated a struggle had taken place in the house. But the most important thing, the grandmother, was nowhere to be found. Thus, by this point, the investigation was faced with two facts. The young man had not contacted anyone. Something serious had clearly happened in the house. And the elderly woman, who usually couldn't travel far without assistance, had disappeared without a trace. Everything indicated that the situation had gone beyond ordinary family difficulties. The situation around the house grew increasingly tense. The neighbors no longer doubted that something terrible had happened. One question remained: where was Grandma? And what had happened in those 2 days that had turned the familiar quiet house into a possible crime scene? When the police finally entered the house, they immediately noticed a heavy air. A stifling odor permeated the rooms, reminiscent of a mixture of mustiness and something metallic. The officers turned on their flashlights and began searching the premises. They first went through the kitchen and bedrooms. Half-eaten food remained on the tables, and things were strewn across the floor. There were no signs of an orderly exit, but rather a hasty and chaotic one. The brunt of the attack fell on the living room. It was there that the patrol came across the body of a 21-year-old man. He was lying face up, in an unnatural position, among overturned furniture. The carpet beneath him was soaked with blood, which had soaked into the fabric and formed a dark stain. The body bore multiple injuries, including wounds and signs of a struggle. Judging by the arrangement of the objects, the collision had been violent and violent. Brown splashes were visible on the walls, and some furniture was broken. A table near the sofa was particularly noticeable. Its leg was broken, leading investigators to immediately suspect it might have been used as a weapon. The scene indicated that the conflict had taken place inside the house and could not have been a random fall or accident. The dog, who had been in the house the entire time, was acting agitated. It was pacing the rooms, howling, and reaching for the body as if trying to get attention. Staff noted that the animal was stressed and likely relived the tragedy itself. An initial inspection revealed no signs of forced entry. All windows and doors were closed, and the locks were intact. This ruled out forced entry. The situation became even more alarming. It was clear that the crime had been committed by someone from the inside or by someone who had the door voluntarily opened. The main issue was the grandmother's absence. The woman's belongings were still there, documents and medications neatly arranged in her room, but the woman herself was nowhere to be found. Neighbors confirmed that she couldn't have traveled far on her own and had severe mobility limitations. A doctor who had previously seen her reported that she required regular care and rarely left the house unaccompanied. This information dramatically narrowed the range of theories. Investigators considered two options. Either the woman had been killed along with her grandson and her body had not yet been found, or she had been involved in the incident. The second option seemed less likely at first glance, but the lack of signs of forced entry forced them to focus on it. During the examination, interesting details were noted. Bloodstains were found in the kitchen, leading toward the bathroom. However, nothing was found in the bathroom itself. Only smudged bare footprints were found on the floor. Forensic experts speculated that someone had attempted to wash away the marks or clean themselves up after a conflict. These details reinforced the theory that someone had been in the house after the murder, taking steps to cover their tracks. Detectives questioned neighbors that same day. One woman claimed to have heard her grandmother's voice the day before the police arrived. She described it as agitated and loud. However, this statement was not corroborated by other witnesses. Several neighbors, on the contrary, said they had not seen the woman for 2 days. The press quickly learned of the incident. In a small town, such cases became the subject of instant discussion. The first newspaper headlines described the mysterious disappearance of an elderly woman and a brutal murder in a quiet neighborhood. The public immediately speculated that the grandmother might have been the victim of a kidnapping. However, investigators hinted at a press conference that everything points to the solution being hidden within the family itself. Meanwhile, forensic experts continued their work. Blood samples were collected from the floor and walls, and fingerprints were lifted from furniture and doors. The marks on the back door were particularly noteworthy. The furniture used to prop it open appeared to have been pushed from the inside. This indicated that someone had deliberately attempted to block the exit. By the end of the first day of the investigation, the theory that the grandmother had left the house voluntarily was becoming less and less convincing. Investigators were leaning toward the idea that she was either in hiding or had been forcibly removed. But where she could have disappeared to, with no transportation, no documents, and no help, remained an open question. Thus, by the time the initial investigation concluded, the picture looked extremely disturbing. The young man had been murdered, the grandmother had disappeared, and the house bore numerous traces of violence and attempts to cover them up. The question of who exactly was behind this became central. The situation surrounding the case was heating up. A family that had seemed quiet and inconspicuous now found itself at the center of a high-profile investigation, and key questions remained unanswered. Following the discovery of the body and an initial search of the house, the investigation entered its active phase. Forensic experts and district detectives were brought in. The top priority was establishing the grandmother's whereabouts. Her disappearance with the door locked from the inside and no signs of forced entry raised more questions than it answered. The first steps were a thorough search of all the premises and surrounding area. In the courtyard, traces of blood were found on the grass, barely noticeable, but consistent with samples seized from the house. This indicated that some of the conflict may have moved outside. However, the trail ended just a few meters away. With no further landmarks, police checked the basement, shed, and dumpsters. These locations yielded no results. No body or items that could explain the disappearance were found. However, the bathroom attracted attention. There, investigators found washed-off traces of blood, barely visible under ultraviolet light. This confirmed that someone had attempted to clean themselves up after the conflict, and that they had done so after the young man's death. Questioning neighbors revealed additional pieces of the story. One man claimed to have seen a woman's silhouette by the window the day before the incident. However, he couldn't pinpoint the exact time and wasn't sure it was really the grandmother. Other neighbors spoke of strange sounds and screams they'd heard 2 days in a row, but dismissed them as unimportant. The investigation also examined the grandson's last calls and messages. His phone was found in the house near his body. His last contacts were recorded on the evening of the day. Neighbors heard the noise. The messages were short and vague, but one friend noted that the young man's tone seemed tense. Detectives considered several theories. The first was the murder of her grandson and the disappearance of the grandmother. However, her limited physical abilities made it doubtful she would have been able to get far or hide. The second theory was third-party intervention. However, the lack of forced entry or signs of forced entry weakened this theory. The third, most disturbing, was a conflict between the grandmother and grandson that culminated in the murder, after which the woman somehow managed to leave the house. This theory gained more attention after the forensic expert's report. An examination of the body revealed that the blows were inflicted with force, but not professionally. No bladed weapons were used. The marks indicated the use of improvised objects, furniture, and heavy household items. The expert added that some of the blows could have been inflicted even by a woman with disabilities if she had acted in a state of emotional distress. The discovery of footprints in the bathroom heightened suspicions. The pipes had been recently flushed, confirming that someone had been in the house after the murder, but not a single fingerprint was found, except for those belonging to the grandson and grandmother. This became a turning point. The investigation almost officially identified the woman as the prime suspect. The situation generated widespread media coverage. Newspapers published articles under headlines such as "Grandmother Wanted for Murder" and "Mysterious Disappearance of Elderly Woman." News reports called the case unprecedented, emphasizing its unusual nature. The public was divided. Some believed the grandmother herself was a victim, while others believed she was responsible for her grandson's death. Police expanded their search, checking train stations, bus routes, medical facilities, and shelters. Officers questioned staff at nearby hospitals, asking if the elderly woman with signs of trauma had been seen there. But the search yielded no results. Investigators also checked surveillance footage from nearby streets. One of the recordings captured a figure resembling a woman walking late at night. However, due to poor image quality, it was impossible to confirm the identity. By this point, tensions had reached breaking point. Investigators understood that the longer the grandmother remained out of sight, the more difficult it would be to piece together the full picture. They found ample evidence of violence in the house, but the absence of the main participant made it impossible to complete the investigation. So the situation stalled. The police had the grandson's body, clear evidence of a conflict, but they lacked the key figure, the woman whose disappearance was turning the case into one of the county's most convoluted stories. The situation escalated, public pressure mounted, and answers remained elusive. After the first days of active investigation, the search focused on the grandmother. She remained the only missing link in the tragic story. Her disappearance raised the most questions. How could a person with disabilities leave a house locked from the inside without leaving any obvious traces? The police placed her on the federal wanted list. Photos appeared on television and in newspapers describing her age, physical features, and medical conditions. Local volunteer organizations joined the effort. Volunteers combed forest belts, vacant lots, and abandoned buildings within a radius of several kilometers from her home. The search was unsuccessful. Investigators simultaneously investigated medical facilities. They checked records at emergency rooms where the undocumented woman might have been found. However, not a single clinic reported her presence. Nursing homes and shelters also reported no new residents matching the description. For some time, the press speculated that the woman might have been the victim of a kidnapping. This hypothesis was fueled by the testimony of several witnesses who claimed to have seen a car with unfamiliar license plates near the house the night before the police were called. However, an investigation failed to confirm these claims. There were no surveillance cameras nearby, and neighbors' accounts differed in detail. Attention soon shifted back to her involvement. Experts noted that there were no signs of a struggle in the house, and the nature of the damage indicated impulsive violence. Psychologists consulting with the police said that even an elderly woman with disabilities could have inflicted such blows in a fit of passion. Several new details added to the tension. A local resident in a nearby village reported seeing an elderly woman walking along the road late in the evening. She was barefoot and appeared confused. The witness couldn't describe her precisely, but there were matches to the description of the missing woman. A search of the area, however, yielded no confirmation. Meanwhile, public opinion was heating up. Two theories were being discussed on social media. Either the woman had become the victim of an unknown crime, or she had committed the murder and was in hiding. Each new day of inconclusive evidence fueled the debate. Some commentators accused the police of incompetence, while others wrote that the situation was too strange to fit standard explanations. There was also disagreement within the investigative team. Some investigators insisted the woman had died somewhere nearby and her body had not yet been found. Others claimed she could have been hiding with friends or in a social institution under a false name. Both theories remained open. To check for possible hiding places, police sent inquiries to neighboring states. They checked buses, trains, and homeless shelters, but not a single confirmed lead emerged. Surveillance cameras in the city captured only one person who vaguely resembled her, but the quality of the footage made it impossible to confirm anything for certain. By this time, the case had become national news. Evening newscasts on national channels discussed the circumstances of the tragedy. Commentators emphasized the uniqueness of the case. The grandmother had disappeared after a brutal murder, and no trace of her fate could be found. The investigation reached a dead end. On the one hand, there was the irrefutable fact of the grandson's murder. On the other, the complete absence of a key figure. Officials acknowledged that the investigation was complicated by the lack of evidence of the grandmother's death and no convincing evidence of her life after the incident. Ultimately, the authorities issued a statement. The woman was placed on the federal wanted list as a possible suspect and as someone whose life may be in danger. This wording underscored the ambiguity of the situation. The tension surrounding the case remained tense. A town that had always been quiet was now living under the weight of a single story. A house on the outskirts, once unremarkable, had become a symbol of a mysterious crime for which answers had never been found.